Hi, everyone. Welcome to this YouTube Live. This is something I do every once in a while here at Curious Neuron. And I'm excited to chat with Carl today. Hi, Carl. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Cindy. How you
Hi.
doing?
I'm doing well. I'm sorry for taking a few minutes to figure this out. But I'm really excited to have this conversation and we're going to actually have this again on the podcast for those of you watching, because I think we need to start having it a little bit more. I've personally been having some conversations with educators both here in Canada and in the US. And I think that when it comes to social emotional learning, there are some misunderstandings around it, misconceptions around it, and also lots of questions around it as well. So we have a lot to talk about. If you haven't yet, for those of you that are watching, Carl has a blog post on our website at curiousneuron.com. I have that link in the show notes, but if you need any information or need help finding it, you can email me at info@curiousneuron.com. And like I said, we're just going to kind of continue that conversation around SEL or social emotional learning today, and then go a little bit deeper, I think, in the podcast for a longer conversation. Today, I wanted to keep it not too long, not too short. We'll see where it goes. But Carl, how about you begin by telling us a little bit about your background? You're an SEL consultant, but about your work, so that we get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. I'm an educator. I've been in the game for nearly over 2 decades now. I don't want to say the years because it makes me feel really old. Um, you can probably tell with the accent. I'm from originally from Australia, and my passion for SEL actually happened maybe about 12, 13 years ago. I had a school principal sort of tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, I think you'd be a really good person to um, join a training for a mental health and well-being framework in Australia." So I've become a facilitator of that, and that's where the passion grew, basically.
Mm,
And so for about now, it's been a long time now, but I've just been an advocate for SEL. And not only for SEL, but the fact that I think we just need to reimagine what education looks like,
mhm.
especially in schools these days.
Yeah.
Um, I guess a lot of what we're going to discuss today is about what to look for in terms of using that SEL lens when you're looking for schools for your children and so on. But we just really need to shift, not shift, but kind of like have this lens of understanding that if we're going to teach children holistically, it's more than just the academics, and
Mm,
having that holistic approach is where we can reach the full potential of the kids.
yeah.
And to really understand that, you have to have an idea of what SEL is all about. So, what I'm doing now, I'm very lucky. I work at a beautiful school called the Priory here in Montreal. I'm the SEL coordinator there, but I have the great opportunity of also going around and helping schools
Mm.
implement SEL across the board and throughout their curriculum.
I think one of the points you mentioned is why we sort of connected, because I also believe that SEL and emotional learning from a young age actually should be a big part of a child's life. I think we do that as parents too, where we focus on the academic aspects, right, of like school readiness and what does that mean, and we think about, like making sure that they can recognize their letters and know their numbers and all of that. But from my perspective as well, coming from a mental health background,
Yeah.
I think that we should have this conversation a lot more, and think about, can my child, regulate themselves, and can they have, an understanding of what emotions are. And then coming to into elementary school, this is where your work is just so important. It's not just about your own emotions, but understanding those of the people around you. We really do need to have this conversation a lot more. So I'm glad that we're having it today.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that we're all on the same page. We hear emotional intelligence, we hear about social emotional learning, what else? I don't know. I talk about emotion regulation.
Yeah.
They're all kind of the same, but not. So when we talk specifically about SEL, what are you speaking about?
Yeah. I guess firstly, just a broad range, the SEL really is providing our kids and the students, but not only the students, the adults, the educators within the education sector, the ability to develop life skills.
Mhm.
And so, uh, it's acquiring the skills, it's knowledge building, it's attitude shifting,
Mm,
really. And it's all about developing this healthy identity, and being able to manage emotions, being able to collectively and individually achieve goals, show empathy for others.
mm,
Make
mhm.
How do we make responsible decisions? How do we support people within our relationships? So when we talk about SEL, fundamentally, there's 5 competencies, and we're going to talk about Castle in a second, but
Would you like me to pull it up?
yeah,
I'm gonna try it,
got
yeah.
it, that would be great.
As I try to figure this out, I think I'm
That's all
supposed
right.
to be I should be able to pull it up. Not sure
Even if
how,
you
but
can't, I can
okay.
just walk
Yeah,
everyone.
as you're speaking, I'll try to figure it out.
Yeah, sure. So there's 5 competencies. We have self-awareness and self-management, and it's really important to understand that we start with self-awareness. It's a foundational competency because without self-awareness, we can't develop all the other competencies. So self-awareness is about understanding your own identity, understanding feelings and emotions, and how to recognize them. Self-awareness is about mindset work, is about uh, growth, understanding your strengths and areas
Mm,
of improvement. Then we go to self management, which is all the regulatory work that we
mm,
talk about. We also talk about the executive functions. And basically how to achieve our goals. So having this understanding of how to manage to fundamentally achieve your goal. And we start with self-awareness and self-management, all about oneself. All right. So we're talking about the intrapersonal skills. And then once we develop those, we move on. So we move to social awareness. So it's all about perspective taking from an empathy type lens, understanding others, understanding hidden norms and social norms, and your biases and stuff like that. And then moving on to relationship skills. So how do I actually develop authentic relationships that I can achieve my goal, but also support
mm,
someone else. And then lastly, we get to the responsible decision making. How do I make these responsible decisions that can, have a positive impact on the world, basically? And so we can't get to the responsible decision making without all the others
mm,
first. And so it's really important. But I go back to the SEL is that it's all intertwined, isn't it? Our
mm.
academic performance is impacted by our feelings and our emotions. If I'm not uh, emotionally connected to what I'm learning, I'm not going to learn it. I'm
Yeah,
not going to be motivated to learn it. So,
exactly. Yeah.
so um, it all supports each other, and it's really important.
I love that you've painted this picture the way that you did because I think often, including myself as parents, we kind of expect certain things from our kids that they probably are not there yet, especially like developmentally.
Yeah,
And when it comes to SEL, I feel that that's a big one for us where we expect, a young child to show empathy towards another child or to build a relationship and they're 3 years old. And we're like, go see that friend and make a friend. And we put a lot on them when it comes to that. Do you
yeah.
see the same thing within the work that you do that sometimes, adults kind of expect certain skills to already be there in kids?
Yeah, look, we've just, you know, lived through a pandemic,
Mm,
and it's funny. I'm bringing this up because of the question that you've just asked me.
mm,
The two biggest demographics of students that were heavily impacted were the 4-year-olds to 7-year-olds
mm,
and our teens.
yeah.
Now, if you think about this, our 4-year-olds to 7-year-olds spent, and we were home, yeah. So when we
Yeah.
had to be home due to just safety reasons and so on. So our 4-year-olds and 7-year-olds spend a lot of time with adults.
Mm,
Now, by them spending a lot of time with adults, when we talk about decision making, when a 4-year-old's with another 4-year-old, that's the way that they learn how
mhm,
to make the appropriate decisions or problem solve
mm,
together. But when they're with an adult, and in a high stress situation like COVID, it's a little easier for the adults to solve the problem. So
yeah.
we noticed And then to add on top of that, with the 4 to 7 year olds, we also saw that the impact of masks. Now, not from a we know that we needed to wear the mask, but from a facial recognition perspective.
Mm,
So we noticed that the 4 to 7 year olds, when school was back in person, there were these crazy behavior problems, right?
mm,
And
mm.
we
Yeah,
were we were they were labeled as behavior problems, but
yeah.
I was trying to explain to teachers and to schools that these are not behavior problems.
Mm,
These are actual social or facial
exactly.
recognition problems, not
Mm,
problems, but deficits,
yeah.
basically. And
Mm,
they're trying to catch up, aren't they? They're trying to
mm,
read this social situation, but yet they're not ready for it because they haven't been around other children. Now, are they going to catch up? 100%.
mhm,
The more we're around others, the more we can read facial expressions, the more we can read body language, tones of voice, and so on. And then you talk about the teens, and we're talking about isolation. And a
mm.
teen needs to be,
There's a social, yeah.
their brain is exploding, and they need to
Mm,
be around others. So that were two huge demographics. So we just
mm,
need to be, parents just need to be aware that developmentally aware. We need to have different. We need to be. It's okay for my child to be a little different to the others. The others might get along with other students a little easier, and that's
mm,
okay.
yeah.
But generally, children catch up. So that, yeah,
And they're skills. So I think it's
sure,
important that we remind ourselves that these are skills, and obviously if it's been 2 years of not practicing these skills, then we're going to see these deficits, arise, but
yeah,
I think that we could just be aware of that and keep working on it with our child, not be like you said, like it happened and now it's not to be worried, but it's to address it. I think we need to address the situation.
sure,
Because I've been hearing the same thing with regards to behavior, that there are so many behavioral issues, and I've said the same thing. We've had this conversation before where there's an underlying emotional issue there, emotion regulation
yeah,
skills, social emotional learning. That's what's going on right now. So,
mhm,
with regards to a parent, let's say, who's listening and their child will be starting school or going to a new school or whatever it might be, coming at the end or this year at some point, what what should be they should what should they be looking for within that
yeah,
school when it comes to the curriculum around SEL?
sure. I guess I might just touch on a couple of
Mm,
considerations, and then we can talk about the curriculum. I guess I've got from the blog post, I've got 8 different considerations, and I guess the first one is, and I recognize when I wrote the blog post, I actually labeled it as choosing your school, like what to consider when choosing your school. And then I thought, and I had someone speak to me, and they were saying, like, Carl, but not all of us get to choose our school. If we're in
mm,
the public sector,
mhm,
um, our child will go to the local school within the catchment area, and so on.
true.
So I would say that apart from choosing, but considerations of what to look
Mhm,
out for when your child's beginning school. And I would start with the first one is when you first interact with the school. Does the school actually publicize their values, their school values, and their mission statement? And this is really important. Is it prominently displayed, or is it on their website? And I say this because from the school values, you'll get a really clear idea of the type of culture and climate the
mm,
school is creating. And not only that, you'll also understand, because our values drive our decisions. So the type of decisions that are going to be made. So it's really important that the first thing you look for is, what are the values, and do they really align with mine? And if they don't, that's okay too. That they're different types of values that your child is going to cultivate and foster as they're at the school. I guess the next one, number 2, would be look out for evidence-based SEL instruction.
yeah.
Like, this is so important, and ask the school, like, do you allocate time for SEL, explicit type of training, and is the SEL training, is it developmentally correct? Is it
Mm,
evidence based type of work? Is it I would even say, uh, you know does it promote diversity and inclusion? Is it culturally responsive? These are all
Mhm.
like
Mm.
factors that you really need to ask the school. And not only that, just be, just ask them, like, are you actually teaching the five competencies of self-awareness and self-management and social awareness and so on? Is
Should
that
all these programs touch on Castle? Is this something that's across the board within schools?
Yeah, so Castle, which I guess we didn't really speak about, but Castle is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And an organization which is at the forefront of social emotional learning. So
Mm.
basically, Castle is the advocate of SEL. They do all the research and evidence, and they find out all the instruction. And they help schools with implementation plans and districts and so on. And not only that, they provide parents with the information. But
Mhm.
Castle, the beauty of Castle is that they've created um, a programs guide. So Castle will review programs, and depending on the schools, every school should do kind of like a needs assessment. And once they've finished their needs assessment, they'll see what their needs are
Mhm.
basically, and then they choose a program that coexists with the needs
Got
that
it.
they need to. And Castle actually rates the type of programs. So anything that's on the Castle in the Castle program guide, that that's evidence based work.
Yeah,
That it's the real deal,
got it.
basically.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Yeah, I wanted to make sure in case somebody's not sure, like which ones are evidence-based,
yeah,
now they can look at their website and find the ones that are.
yeah.
Yeah.
Most important.
Oh, sorry.
I guess the next one, I'm just going through our things to consider when we're
Mhm.
talking about or thinking about schools for our children. The next one is SEL integration. So not only do we want the explicit teaching, we also want it to be integrated into other curriculum areas. I know you're a big fan, Cindy, of using literature, for emotions and teaching emotions. And I say to schools all the time, like if we're talking about emotional vocabulary, we could easily integrate that into our writing pieces or
Mhm. True.
reading comprehension. So SEL is not just something that fits into that explicit teaching, but it needs to be also integrated into other curriculum areas.
Even, art, I would even say that there's so many other ways.
So many
Yeah.
art. We're
Yeah.
talking about science, like
Mhm. Mhm.
we're talking about you with your background of
Yeah.
teaching the brain, and
Mm.
and if we're going to talk about a big factor or a big um, part of SEL is growth mindset. And when you're
Mm.
teaching about growth mindset, you're teaching the kids about the brain being malleable and things like that. And that's all in your science. That's in
Mm.
it's so easily can be
Yeah,
integrated. It's not such a difficult thing to do.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I would say one more is student voice.
What
Make
would
sure
that mean? What does that mean on your end?
I would say that make sure that when you're looking for your school or considering it something that the kids have platforms. The kids
Mhm.
have a platform to help the school make decisions. The
Mhm.
actual kids have what we call um, student representative councils. So they
Mhm.
work actually with the teachers or the leaders within the school. They give their perspectives. They help problem solve issues within the school. This actually gives the kids themselves a form of engagement and a
Mhm.
form of purpose at the school. So this is really important. Student voice is one that you want your child to go somewhere where they're going to be heard,
Yeah.
and seen and feel like they belong. So that's really important.
That's another important part, and I think that, if your school and we're gonna touch on this very lightly, but then I wanna go into depth, like, on the podcast, but,
Oh, for sure.
when it comes to, if somebody's listening to this and they realize, "You know what? My school isn't really doing this." They're saying that SEL is included in their program and that there's a curriculum there, but there's not much there now that I heard Carl mention all this. I'm wondering what the next steps are. So, would you I personally think there's a lot that we can do at home as well,
Yeah.
and it's unfortunate if there are schools that are not doing this, and like I said, the past couple of weeks, I've been having a lot of great conversations with teachers both here in Canada and the US, And it seems to be that a lot of districts in the US or some places here in Canada are saying that they're including it, but when you really look at it, they're not going through all the castle, that they're not going through that framework. They're kind of bringing it in. Teachers are already struggling with the workload that they have, and they're struggling with bringing that in. But I'm wondering if, and now that I'm saying that out loud, maybe for the podcast, it could be something that we go more into detail in terms of what it could look like in a school, because there are many ways that this can be approached, like we said before very briefly. But there was one SEL consultant from, she was in New York, I believe, and she said that she was hired during the pandemic and had a 2-year contract for SEL work, helped, all the schools in this district, kind of build their SEL framework or program. They're not done yet, but the contract is over and there aren't any funds to continue it. So I'm wondering, when we talk about SEL, it's being spoken about a lot. Like everybody's talking about SEL because we've seen the impact from the pandemic, but I
Yeah.
don't think everybody's doing something about it. I think we're saying that we have to,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I guess my question to kind of bring this conversation to a close is, if a parent knows that their school isn't really doing what you just said, what are the next steps?
Yeah, look, I think it's really important that not only do they approach the school in a manner of speaking to some form of
Mm,
leadership at the school and just quizzing them as to we know the needs of our children
mm,
and is there any possibility of introducing SEL
mm,
within our school? Um, Being supportive of it also, so
mm.
that not only do we want it, but is there any form of having a partnership? Whatever we're going to do at school, let's try and do it at home. So then we have this
Yes.
partnership and we can support the practice. I think that that's really important. Look, at the end of the day, uh, the just bringing up and being noticed
Mhm,
and being creating a form of awareness is really important, because the more noise we make,
mhm.
the more of a chance that it's going to occur. So I think that that's the most important, and we do it in a way that's respectful, but
Yeah, of course.
that's the most
Yeah.
important thing.
And I think you're right. I think we just need to keep bringing it up because it is something that should be part of the curriculum in schools. And I just think that we need to talk about it a lot more. So if anybody's watching, or even if you're watching the replay, let us know in the questions, like if you do have specific questions, and we will address that in the podcast
Yeah,
to continue this conversation. You mentioned this partnership, and that's something that I've been expressing a lot more lately in terms of the schools that are, addressing SEL within their school and their curriculum are feeling, so this is again just a few teachers that I've spoken with lately, that it's not being brought into the home. So the child is at school learning all these amazing skills, but then when it comes to the home environment, the skills aren't being brought there, and parents are struggling as well. They're stressed, they're overworked, and it's just difficult. Is there any advice that you can offer to this point? Like what
yeah,
can we do to make it easier for parents as well to bring this into
yeah.
their home?
Yeah, I that's a great question, and I think that that's the biggest one of the biggest struggles
Mm,
that schools have is, we are implementing certain practices, and then it gets to home, and then they're not followed through with, or vice versa.
mhm.
Something could be happening at home and it's not happening
Sure.
at school,
Yeah.
and I think it's really important for our kids to know that this partnership of school and home is what makes this ecosystem really important, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's what gives our kids the best possible opportunity to thrive. Now, in terms of the transfer of information, I just think it's really important that we have this open dialogue
Mhm.
between teachers and parents, and that also that the schools themselves are providing platforms for parents to come into the school and learn.
Mm,
It's not about just transferring it at home, but once you bring the parents into the school, this sense of
mhm,
community occurs, and there's more of a chance of then the parents bringing it home.
mm.
But if I was to send something home, it's a
It's very
little
different.
harder, isn't it?
Yeah.
So once we get all the parents into the school, then we're creating this sense of community, this sense of involvement, this sense of partnership,
Mm.
which then it's a lot easier to transfer back at home after that.
That's an amazing point. And the schools that I did speak with, they spoke about like sending, one-page documents at home to try to continue the conversation. But I think you're right. I think that's an extremely important point where we need to bring them into the schools and have these conversations with the parents there. Um, Thank you. Thank you for having this conversation. I think now that we've said it out loud, I there's a lot that we have to address on the
Yeah.
podcast, especially when it comes to SEL. Again, I think there's still lots of questions around it. We briefly talked about Mark Brackett last time. I want to bring it up so that if somebody's watching this, they can start doing the research and a bit of the reading around SEL before we jump onto the podcast.
Sure.
Is Ruler. For those of you watching, Mark Brackett is the author of Permission to Feel, which is a great place to start to understand how you can implement this within your home. It starts with us, right? It starts with our understanding and how we regulate our emotions and our own mindfulness and all of that. But
Yeah.
his framework is great to start with. And even if you just Google Ruler, Mark Brackett or Ruler Yale, is it at Yale? No, he's at
Yeah,
no.
he's at
Oh,
Yale
it is Yale, yeah.
University. Yeah.
I think that's a good place to start. Can you give a brief description of it if you
Yeah, I would
can?
love to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So ruler the uh, SEL approach developed by the Center of Emotional Intelligence
Mhm,
at Yale University, and Mark Brackett is the head of that center. And basically, ruler stands for an acronym. So the first R is to recognize, so recognizing emotions in oneself and others. Then the U is to understand. So, why am I having these emotions, or why is someone else experiencing these emotions? L is to label. So, we
mm,
want to get really granular. We want to get quite specific. You'll hear Mark Brackett say we want to get nuanced in our vocabulary.
yeah.
And then we have the second E. So, we've gone through R, U, and L. The second E is to express. Am I
Mhm,
expressing my emotions in a way that's socially acceptable,
mhm,
basically?
mhm,
And then the last one is to regulate. So, am I really happy with what I'm experiencing? Do I want more of it? Do I want less of it? What are the strategies and skills that I need to basically achieve my goal? So, ruler is recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate. And they have some signature practices. But as you said, Cindy, I would really highly recommend it. Not only read the book, but check out the mood meter. The mood meter
yes,
is
yeah.
that great tool that's at the end of the book. My school, we use the mood meter all the time.
Mm,
For me, it's one of the probably the most uh, impactful
mm.
SEL tools.
I
So
Yeah.
yeah, I would highly recommend everyone checks it out.
The labeling part, just the ability to put words to what we're feeling, because like Mark Brackett talks about a lot is uh, how am I feeling or how are you feeling? I'm fine or everything's good or everything.
Yeah.
We really do have a limited vocabulary when it comes to emotions, and if we could just express it a little bit more, being joyous or being fulfilled or being excited, right? They're all positive, but they're a little bit different. And if we can have that vocabulary and teach that to our children, and especially when it's more difficult moments, I was listening to a podcast this weekend. Um, I forget her name, but she's the one from The Big Bang Theory who has a podcast, and she,
I can't
Mayim Bailey, or yeah, she and her partner on the podcast, executive producer, spoke about an event where he was feeling many emotions, and he spoke about feeling sad at the same time as mad, at the same time as frustrated and disappointed with an event that had happened. And the act of labeling it and putting it out there sort of calmed him in that moment to handle the event that caused the strong emotions. And then he went out to regulate and walk and cry and let it all out and do whatever he had to do. But it just made me think of Mark Brackett's work with Ruler, where the labeling part, I don't think we realize how powerful that is. And there's a lot of research around that.
Yeah, I would even go as far as saying that from a parent perspective, but a teacher perspective, that if our children have, sorry, if we have a a developed emotional vocabulary,
Mm.
then our interventions are better.
Yes.
So
True.
by having a developed vocabulary, the way that I express myself, I can actually attain the intervention that I need.
Mm.
So if I give you an example, if I go up to a child and I say, "How you feeling?" and they say angry, but another child will say, "I'm enraged."
Mhm.
Well, I'm
There's a
gonna
difference.
I'm gonna deal with enraged a lot
Of
different
course.
to what
Yeah.
angry is. So that's really important. The second thing also, sorry, Cindy, I've got
Yeah.
something stuck
No
in my
worries.
throat. Um,
And just the example that you brought up about, like, angry and enraged, I think already at that level as an educator, somebody working with kids, it helps you identify, like you said, like, at needs basis in terms of emotions, like, how do you address them? If everybody's feeling fine, you can't address anything, but if you're seeing the difference in the levels, then you're
yeah,
able to say, "Okay, I need to prioritize you," or, "This is, something that's more important right now." Go
yeah.
on, yeah, that it's really important.
And I guess the other factor that you brought up is, the work of Dr. Daniel Siegel. Like he
Yeah.
turns around and mentions, as soon as you label, as soon as you label, your brain already starts, or your heart rate already starts to slow down.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
just the simple fact of labeling is a regulatory strategy.
Mm,
The simple the as soon as you say,
mm,
"I feel," the brain will go into it automatically shifts from the mid part of the brain up into the cortex because it's searching for what it means to feel like
mhm.
that. It's searching for what the experience is, and you'll already create that sense of
The
calm.
strength
So,
goes down. Yeah,
mm,
yeah. That's the power of mindfulness as well, I think, but
mm.
we'll get into that with the podcast, but I told you I wanted to try to keep it at 20 minutes. I knew it was gonna be impossible with you
Yeah, no,
because
I
we
know.
have so much to talk about. For those of you that are watching, Adelaide, thank you, by the way, for your questions. She mentioned Paul Ekman.
Yeah,
Um, I'm, for some reason, not familiar right now with the work. I'd have to
yeah.
go back. But I think we need to add that too, and anger, yeah, enrage and outrage. Exactly. This is just the beginning of our conversation. Thank you for joining me today,
Well,
and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you.
thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.